Hi, my name is Madi, and I'm a double major in politics and CTSJ, and I'm a rising junior. This summer, I interned with Eastern Communities for Environmental Justice. My presentation today is titled, It Took a Pandemic to Blank, How COVID-19 Propelled Social Change in Eastern Communities. The idea behind the blank is to highlight not one, but multiple issues that my internship covered because of COVID. And I'd like to quickly thank Professor Martha Matsuoka from the UEP department at Oxy and my supervisor Jessica Prieto, who leads Community Stability and Policy Organizing at East Yard, for being really flexible and supportive throughout this whole experience. That said, let's get started. So first I'll go through some of East Yard's background before going over how they strategized from both before and during COVID. Then I'll talk about my two major tasks throughout this experience and how these, among other tasks that I had, tie into East Yard's goal as an organization. Lastly, I'll tie my work and the work of East Yard together, and I'll highlight what I've learned along with the overall significance of the social change that East Yard has been pushing for. I hope to show how the work East Yard has done thus far and the work I did under their guidance are a critical part of establishing how we will collectively dismantle the multiple systems of violence and oppression in both our local communities and beyond during and post-COVID-19. East Yard is an environmental justice org that was founded by Commerce and East LA community members in 2001 before it became funded as a nonprofit org under fiscal sponsorship of social and environmental entrepreneurs in 2002. What initiated this organizing was the increasingly visible health and environmental impacts of industries like Exide Technologies and the East LA rail yards. The environmental impact of Exide, a lead-acid battery manufacturing company, is toxic levels of lead in the predominantly Latinx communities surrounding the company's manufacturing sites, which then infiltrate the body so deeply that lead was found in the teeth of children living in some of these heavily polluted areas. Some specific health impacts of the rail yard's air pollution include asthma, increased risk of bronchitis, emphysema, and premature death from heart ailments, along with cancer. This is an ongoing battle in the Southeast LA communities since the 90s, thus explaining East Yard's ultimate goal of a healthy and safe environment to live in. This is a map that I adapted from one that I found on the Pat Brown Institute for Public Affairs website. East Yard primarily works with Bell Gardens, Commerce, Compton, Cudahy, Huntington Park, Linwood, and Maywood, along with Southgate. And the stars that you see at the top of the map are local rail yards and Exide Technology sites. The map here shows the lead levels in areas surrounding the industrial sites that I highlighted on the other map. The LA County Department of Public Health and Department of Toxic Substance Control confirmed that the impact area of this lead spreads at least 1.25 to 1.75 miles from the site. This encompasses 10,000 plus residential properties and over 110,000 residents in East LA, Boyle Heights, Commerce, Bell Gardens, Vernon, Cudahy, Maywood, Bell, and Huntington Park. Again, this is an ongoing battle to remove companies like Exide from these BIPOC communities, and if you think about it, the health conditions which are a direct result of these pollutants have also put these communities at a further risk of dying of COVID-19, which is why East Yard has a continuous focus on advocating for a healthy and safe environment, particularly now during the pandemic. East Yard strategizes by building up their community's power and self-advocacy. They do so, for example, through their Fighting for Life Academy, FFLA, where they educate community members about the systems of oppression which impact them individually and collectively. This year it was virtual, and topics were adapted to our current context, the pandemic and the uprisings. They were able to reach around 80 of their members, something they could not have done without Zoom. East Yard also strategizes around influencing policy decisions to ensure the protection of health and environmental justice. Before COVID, they did so in the form of protesting, door knocking, and forming coalitions with other orgs around specific policies. Now, they continue organizing virtually through social media, submitting public comments, petitioning, and spreading information about potential policies and resources. The culminative effort of East Yard's community base and influencing policy is movement building. Their work centers around three I's: the interpersonal, institutional, and internalized, which I was introduced to during FFLA planning. The work they do within these three I's contributes to the movement towards attaining environmental justice nationally and globally. They continue to prioritize building the community and working collectively to attain a healthy and safe living environment for all. In this section, I'll highlight two central tasks that I had for this internship, and both of which were pre-existing issues that were aggravated by the pandemic and then exposed to the public. Specifically, I'll discuss how I researched what cities were spending on police in contrast to the other things that communities in East Yard need, and I'll also discuss the different policies addressing renters and mortgagees during COVID. At the end, I'll mention how these, along with my other smaller tasks, tie together with East Yard's goal as an organization, and I'll also talk about how critical this research was for me personally and for East Yard in understanding the current uprisings and establishing how we will collectively dismantle multiple systems of violence and oppression locally and beyond during and post-COVID. At the beginning of the current uprisings, which ignited national calls to defund the police, I was assigned to research the police budgets of these 9 different Southeast LA cities on the screen. I also analyzed the LA County Sheriff Department's budget for the cities that didn't have their own police department. The numbers on the screen are the amount of money received by each city's police department or how much they paid the LA County Sheriff Department for their services, along with the percentages these made up from the city's budget. My findings were consistent nearly across the board. Public safety is the top, if not the second or third highest expense in city and county budgets. A majority of that money, which is given to the police, is given to officers in the form of salaries, overtime, retirement funds, vacation buyout, sick day buyout, cafeteria plans, multiple healthcare plans, and in the LA County Sheriff Department's case, a dependent care fund, which is money for their dependents, and this list of benefits is not exhaustive. In these 9 cities, police receive between 11 and 50% of the entire budget, with nearly all of this coming from the general funds, which is money that the city's taxpayers cultivate within their own communities. For cities with their own police, the amounts range from $7 million to $32 million. For the cities with contracts with the LA County Sheriff Department, amounts range from $4 million to $23 million. Commerce, Compton, Cudahy, Linwood, and Maywood surrender up to half of their entire city's budget to contracts with the LA County Sheriff Department, again using funds from the general fund, only for a fraction of that amount to be reinvested in the form of police services or resources. $18.5 million is given to the East LA station by the LA County Sheriff Department to serve these 5 cities along with 4 others. Each city gives upwards of $3 million for these services, with Compton topping out at $23 million, while only receiving $2 million in services from the East LA station, assuming that resources are distributed evenly. From the LA County Sheriff Department's budget, it's unclear where exactly the money these cities give, significant amounts of money, is even worked into their budget. For Bell Gardens, Huntington Park, Bell, and Southgate, it's exceedingly clear that very little, if any, of the money is actually being spent on community safety. Programming accounts for less of the police's budgets than overtime or retirement. When discussing potential changes for the police, the issue of improved training was brought up, which was said to require more money, but very little, less than $1 million in all 4 of these cities combined, goes towards training currently. Yet they spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions, on uniform fees, cell phone allowances, car maintenance, gas for patrol cars, office supplies, overtime at the shooting range, and the list goes on. The next 2 slides are some of the infographics that I made based on the information from the previous slide. I also practiced writing a public comment in response to the letter that the mayor of Maywood released denouncing the movement to abolish the LA School Police Department. While looking at all of these budgets, I learned that the police are getting all sorts of money to be wasted on anything but protecting their communities at the cost of things that would actually benefit these constituents. In all of the budgets that I looked at, education was mentioned in passing by 1 budget. It was for the creation of a small scholarship, but that was all. Compton, in response to COVID-19, consolidated multiple departments and eliminated some altogether to accommodate a smaller budget, but they kept their LA County Sheriff Department contract around the same amount. Allocating emergency funds to local hospitals was not mentioned in any of the proposed or adjusted budgets to accommodate COVID-19. Rental and housing assistance during COVID is primarily funded by the very small grants given by the CARES Act, when there are actually millions being wasted on police budget's excessive personnel costs. The $26,000 spent on office supplies in Bell Gardens and $39,000 spent in Bell on overtime at the shooting range could easily cover the rent of several families in their respective cities. Cities claim not to have enough money to implement social services like rental assistance or cancellation, or providing free COVID testing or free meals for people who need it, but they do. The key is to really supporting these communities is in reimagining the city's budgets and to actually prioritize their constituents. Before I go any further, I'd like to clarify the difference between rental and mortgagee assistance and the cancellation of rent using an infographic that East Yard posted on their Instagram. Assistance is indirect and it goes to the landlords rather than financially supporting the tenants who actually need the support. Because there is a set amount put aside for rental assistance, the budget is limited and results in a lottery, which does not offer enough support for these individuals. The public produces the budget that would be set aside for rental assistance, and considering where most of the city puts their money, there's very little to actually be put aside towards assistance. Further, the application process is a burden on tenants and would deter the people who need this the most from applying. Canceling the rent and mortgage, however, would prioritize housing for homes rather than profit, is universal, and instead places the responsibility of producing funds to support the rent cancellation on banks and corporate landlords. The main focus of my research on acknowledging the tenant and mortgagee needs focused on the different policies on rent and mortgage cancellation and the banning of evictions due to the non-payment of rent, which have arisen in response to COVID-19's economic impact. HB 6515, introduced by Representative Ilhan Omar in April, would have canceled the rent and mortgage payments due during the pandemic. It would have also protected tenants from evictions and prevented foreclosures, and it would have also given landlords assistance for missed rent payments. The federal bill died in committee and has since been followed by the Rental Assistance and Market Stabilization Act, which does not cancel rent and mortgage payment but would offer rental assistance for up to 3 years after the pandemic to individuals who are both low income and who have lost income due to COVID-19. On a state level, California's AB 1436 would prevent evictions due to the non-payment of rent during COVID, but would still require the eventual repayment of missed rent payments after the state of emergency ends. The moratoriums in these different counties and cities similarly prohibit eviction, and they prevent the missed payments of rent and mortgage from negatively impacting people's credit, while also prohibiting landlord harassment for the non-payment of rent. Still, with these moratoriums, there is the expectation of eventually repaying. So far, only Ithaca, New York seems to be among the closest places to actually canceling the rent. Their city council passed a resolution that would allow their mayor to cancel the rent for the 75% of constituents who are renters in their city, pending the approval of the New York Department of Health. Once approved, the Rental Forgiveness Commission of Ithaca would be formed, consisting of 3 renters and 2 landlords appointed by the mayor, and they would institute systems and rules for the forgiveness of rent and the extension of leases for those tenants in the city of Ithaca otherwise in jeopardy of homelessness as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Aside from Ithaca, there has yet to be an ordinance or policy at any level that will prevent the onslaught of evictions following the end of the COVID-19 state of emergency. For example, what about when the economy fails to recover after reopening and renters are still unable to repay their rent, much less repay the missed payments? There's something to be pulled from each of these attempts to protect renters and mortgagees during the pandemic, but there's definitely more that can be done. Further, whatever is done to help and support renters during the COVID-19 emergency needs to be permanent, because the issue of rent not being affordable has existed since before the pandemic began. The issue of affordable housing, unaffordable healthcare, the safety and health of communities of color like the ones East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice stands up for, all of these already existed, and how we address them now during the pandemic will determine what steps we take to resolve these issues in the future. The research I did this summer can be seen as the first part of East Yard's theory of change. The budget information I broke down will be used to help educate members and support organizing efforts around restructuring Southeast LA city budgets to prioritize the community's needs. The rent and mortgage policies I looked at will be used as examples for what policies East Yard should support to help renters and mortgagees in their communities. The information I helped gather overall will be a significant part of building the East Yard community's base as they begin to advocate for intra and post-COVID policies that are health protective and safety oriented. I'm happy to have been a part of this, and I thoroughly enjoyed this type of research. I hope to incorporate these topics in future research like in my comps in senior year, and I hope to work with East Yard again. I'll leave you with this. The summer seems to have ignited in us a sense of urgency, and we should hold on to that. If I learned anything from my internship at East Yard, it's that now is a critical moment of knowledge exchange, community building, and organizing. While I describe for you the nuances and intersections of issues like police overfunding and insufficient tenant protections during the pandemic, I hope to have highlighted the changes we initiate now once we've educated and solidified our base, are especially important. It took the pandemic to cast a light on what BIPOC communities have been fighting for years. But the social changes that COVID has propelled in these communities like East Yard across the country will establish the basis for how we will finally begin to dismantle the systems of injustice that created all of these issues to begin with. As we conceptualize what dismantling these systems would look like, we must understand that all of the aforementioned problems are inextricably linked. Housing, safety, health, and environmental justice are deeply connected to each other, and their resolutions in the larger context of attaining equality, safety, health, and justice for all will also be inextricably linked. Thank you again to my mentor and my supervisor. This has been a wonderful experience. Please stay safe, you guys. Bye.